Welcome to the Las Vegas IT Management Podcast. My name is Shatoya Marie, and today we have Trevor Lothian here with us today. Super excited to get to know you a little bit today. Trevor, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. And yourself?
Pretty good. I'm just living the life. Trevor, can you just give us a brief overview of your journey in the IT field?
Yeah. So my journey in IT really started effectively when I was 18 or so. I got a computer job at a former company called Computer Renaissance in San Diego. It was a repair shop. So I started there and I worked there for a while. I built out computers. I sold computers, did a bunch of different things, a lot of hats, jack of all trades kind of thing is where I think I started really acting that way in my IT capacity as a small mom and pop business. So I had to do a lot of different things. So from there, ended up moving to Las Vegas and moved out here. Couldn't find a computer job close by. There was I think it was CompUSA before they all went out of business in the Henderson area. And I applied, didn't really go anywhere. So I ended up working at Smith's. So I stepped away from IT for a while, did that, tried doing door-to-door sales for solar, didn't really like that. And eventually found my way to a reprographics firm where I was doing photocopies, and that progressed into doing coding in the proprietary legal software they used and supervising and working with technical training for employees of the different law firms we supported. And after a while, about 6 years or so being there, there was a layoff. So I left, and a former colleague suggested I apply where he's at. They had an opening for an IT generalist kind of position. It was a rehab facility. So I went there, and some of the stuff I'd played around with as a kid, making my own like Pokemon websites, I ended up using those HTML and CSS skills to dig in and work in their Drupal environment, hanging security cameras, patching stuff in the network closet, rebuilding computers. After some time of being there, I found my way over to Solar City. In the interview, it was a contract position, but the interview was kind of funny. They pointed at a pallet of monitors, like, so how you feel about installing a bunch of monitors? I'm like, yeah, it doesn't sound like a big deal. So they hired me pretty much on the spot. I knew later that afternoon I was going to be a contractor there the next day. So it was a bit of a struggle. I ran through that. I was at Solar City and Tesla combined for almost 8 years. Ultimately, Tesla acquired Solar City. But while I was there, I went from contractor to IT engineer to supervisor to operations manager. And then when Tesla acquired us, they call it leveling, and then moved back down to an individual contributor role. Yeah, I did a lot of things there. Managed printers, managed cell phone accounts, did merger and acquisition projects, office builds, office teardowns, office, expansions. Anything that didn't have a home typically found its place onto my plate. So I did a lot of different things and left from there to go to Motional for a couple of years. Motional is a self-driving car company, and they are based out of Boston, but they had a branch out here in Vegas. And worked there for a while to go back into a managerial role as an IT ops manager. Was promoted there to senior ops manager. And my team there, we ran the imaging process and a lot of things like that. And after a while, I had received about 3 different phone calls over time from my former manager at Tesla saying, when are you going to come back? Please come back home. So I did at the beginning of 2024. And during the most recent round of stuff that's been going on with Tesla, I left again in May. So right now I'm currently between jobs, but that's been my journey so far.
Awesome. It's crazy how life can take us in many different directions.
Absolutely.
So it's just amazing how that kind of things work out. And could you share with us, because I know you did mention that you've, got into different things within the IT industry when you turned 18, but what sparked that interest in this technology world?
So it's really a couple things. As a kid, very young, we had hand-me-down computers from my grandmother's business. So the first computer I remember having was an 8086. It was all text-based, monochrome monitor, and we would play text-based games. Eventually, there were some like really basic blocky graphics and stuff that were there, but it was all just like ASCII characters. So that was a joy of computers I had from a very young age, and that continued forward as we went through from 8086 to 286, 386, and went through the different technology as it came out and as it was handed down to us, of course. But I always had that fascination and that joy there, right? My brother and I, we were the nerds, and we wanted to go and play with computers. So when I saw that there was a posting for a position at this computer store, I applied And I was quite excited when I got the position because I got to play with computers for a job. And, being my second job in the workforce, it was really nice to have something that was kind of, or not just kind of, but very familiar to me at home. So that there was that. And a few years down the road, my brother had passed away on his motorcycle. And when that happened, he was much more the IT guy at the house than I was. So he was the one doing the coding. He was learning Linux and doing all this stuff, and I was playing video games. That's what my job was to do, was to play video games. So I ended up being asked to do quite a bit more with that, and found myself in a position where I was using some of those skills that I didn't really hold near and dear. So I like to tell people I kind of more or less fell into doing IT related stuff. And it's not really the thing that I would say I ever looked from the outset that I was going to do as a job or a career. I'm very mechanical, very handy, whether it be woodworking or wrenching on a car. Those are all things that are near and dear to my heart as well. But I fell into IT doing that. So the spark really comes from a young age, being around technology that I was lucky to have around at a very young age.
Got it. I feel like a lot of us kind of go into the direction just because of experiences. Yes, and I totally get that. And Trevor, you've, held various roles from entry level positions to management. What are some of the things, the key challenges that you've, and rewards of this progression?
So one of the biggest challenges I found in actually moving on to leadership is if you're moving into leadership from a role where you were not in a leadership role, and those employees that were your peers are now your subordinates or are now, looking to you for that leadership capacity. Not all the time, but sometimes there has been some animus there where some employees might think that they're more deserving, that they've got more of a tenure. So they should be more deserving instead of going off of the merit. So, there's some challenges there that can present themselves. And those are things that are most carefully navigated. There's a lot of personalities, and sometimes those can lead to some conflict. So I've experienced that myself in my career, and it's just one day at a time, and working with those individuals, and eventually you get through it. So it's a bit of a struggle there, but that's probably the biggest challenges that I had. One of the other challenges I had too is not having been promoted before until I was. You can leave some things out. I mean, it's that inexperience where you don't know that your moment to do A, B, or C was right then, like salary negotiation or talking about what you'll be doing or some of the expectations, and making sure that if you have any opportunity to have a voice in what's going to happen, it's right there. And if you don't do that, then you can kind of shoot yourself in the foot unknowingly, unwittingly, just because you don't have that experience to tell me I should have negotiated this. And I personally have missed out on those opportunities that first time around. And then, talking to some folks who had been promoted before and had been in the workforce for quite a bit longer after the fact, found that, that's something to do better with next time. And I had those opportunities. Thankfully, I was promoted again in the future and took those opportunities to negotiate. But that's something that I kind of kicked myself about for a while. It's like, how did I not know this? But you don't know what you don't know.
Right. No, that is so true. And thank you for sharing, Trevor. And I also know, as you mentioned, you've worked for companies such as Telsa and Solar City. Can you just share a notable experience or lesson learned from these high stake projects?
Yeah. So a lot of the projects I engaged in were not just me by myself. There's a lot of people, a lot of different team members you work with. And one thing to make sure that I think you always keep at the front of your mind is that everyone you're working with is human, just like you and I. They have their own motivations, they have their own likes and dislikes. And if you can keep that stuff in mind, it's much easier to work through anything, any challenge, any problem. It's much easier to come up with solutions when you have people wanting to work with you. So the idea that you're always right, this should not be something that you have percolate to the surface. So for me, it's really just, it's that takeaways, keep that human element first and foremost in front of you when you're working with everyone. There are going to be things that you can read into. And if you don't know for sure that that's what someone meant, or that's the intention they had, ask the question. Don't assume.
Got it. Well, thank you for sharing that, Trevor. And then with your combined technical and people management skills, how did this dual role shape your approach to leadership and team management?
It allowed me to do a lot more
Weird.
leading from the.
Trevor, for whatever
Yep.
reason, I can't hear you. I don't know what happened.
And can you hear me now?
Yep.
Sorry. So for me, it's leading from the front. So being able to show your team members and other teams that it's not a do as I say, not as I do, but it's a let's do this together. Let's work together. I'm happy to lead the charge and actually work there with you, work in the trenches. I'm not afraid of getting my hands dirty. So it's that kind of opportunity that presented itself that really allowed me to meet with the team, meet them more than halfway in some cases. And I think it helped to garner respect in a faster rate than I would have otherwise. If I was just like, hey, Bob, can you go take care of this? If it was, hey, Bob, let's go work on this together. It was much more effective.
Got it. And I've been there as well. So I totally understand just the importance of willing to do the things that you're asking for. So that's just so important. And, having started with an 8086 PC, you've seen some significant technology changes. What advancements are most exciting and how they impact IT landscape today?
I think it's the graphics and the computing power that we have available today, hand in hand. I mean, really, the computing power lends towards the graphics. So they're basically just another type of CPU, but those two things together really have changed everything, right? I mean, we've got high definition video stuff that we can play around with now, AutoCAD, all kinds of 3D modeling programs, or the special effects that we have in movies that we really enjoy seeing, like Iron Man with his blasters on his hands and stuff like that. That stuff wouldn't exist without the computers we have today. So I really feel that those things together have really just changed the way that we perceive the world and what we can do, and speed things up, make things more interesting.
Yeah, no, totally. A lot of things that we're doing nowadays, we couldn't do without technology. So it is such a blessing. And then can you share your insights into the evolution of networking equipment over your career and how modern advancements have influenced IT infrastructure?
Yes. So I still recall what the dial-up modem sounded like as I was getting onto some of the, AOLs and Prodigy and other types of, first few steps on the internet, for me in the 90s were like. And businesses have changed dramatically in what they do with the consumption of data. And as those internet connections have gotten faster, things have just, it's opened up a lot of possibility. So I think that internet connections have been a huge thing. The WAN technologies that exist out there for, you know, um, connecting our businesses together or different locations together to allow for resiliency and redundancy has been a tremendous benefit. I remember early on in my IT career, having a single internet circuit, was eventually it was going to go down. And if you didn't have something as a backup, it was going to be a problem. And now it seems to be much more the norm than to be the niche case to plan for something like that. So I think that those things together, the networking design to allow for resiliency and redundancy, and then the internet speeds have been huge.
Got it. And I'm a 90 baby myself, so I remember that whole the dial tone. I mean, if you
Right.
were on the computer, someone was calling you, it was a hot mess. So I remember those times, but I was a young child at that time. So,
Right.
but I do remember. And so, what are some of the critical considerations when managing office builds and relocations? Any tips for ensuring a smooth transition?
Yeah, I think I can keep this one fairly short. So knowing the timeline is critical. You need to know when you're starting and when it's supposed to end. You also need to have the experience or be able to get the experience on how long things are going to take. So if you think about, like, you go to a mechanic and you say, I want to get my spark plugs changed. They have a book that quotes the amount of time that it takes them to get that done, and they charge you for that. The mechanic may do it in a quarter of that time, but they're still paid even though for the full time, even though it's faster. And for a office move, you need to assume the worst. You're going to be working with a ton of different people, and not everyone's going to be operating at your speed. You're not dealing with one mechanic, you're dealing with a bunch of different people. So understanding how long things are going to take to happen, you have to plan worst case. So if you keep that in mind, then it works a lot better. The timeline, going back to the first point, If it's too short, you need to push back. You need to have reason to push back too. Here's why this is not going to work. Here are all the things that have to occur. Here's how much time those things are going to take. And we can try our best to squeeze it as fast as we can, but it's one of those things you really have to be able to push back. And going back to knowing how long things are going to take, you can plan for contingencies that way. If you know that your staffing agency you're working with can give you 4 people, but they've got another 4 people available, that helps you to know if those 4 people aren't pulling out all the stops for you. You can either get more bodies or possibly replace some of the people who've been assigned your project. So there's things like that. There's no level of overthinking you can do on an office move. Think about it, work through it, plan for it.
Got it. Understood. And I'm sure sometimes things don't go as planned. So I'm sure that's very
Absolutely.
important. Just like anything. And then how do you approach the integration of IT systems and teams during mergers and acquisition and to minimize disruption and ensure a cohesive environment?
So you need to take stock of what's there. What are they using? What applications are they using? What hardware are they using? And then you need to work with those teams. You got to talk with them. Yeah, and there's a lot of conversations you're going to have, understanding what it is they're doing, shadow them, talk to them, figure out what they're doing, why they're doing it, and how that's going to integrate into the landscape of the company that's acquiring them. So let's say this is SolarCity gobbling up another company. When SolarCity does that, SolarCity's likely, if they're the parent company buying this other one, they're not going to say, I'm going to use their technology. They're going to look at what they already have in their stack and say, how do I take that round peg and fit it into our square hole? So they're going to, rely on someone like myself to say, hey, all right, so what are you doing with that? And how am I going to take that and move that here? And if I know what I need the end part to look like, and I know the start, and I go to the end and I work backwards from there, I can figure out what those steps look like, come up with a plan, present that plan once I've had those initial conversations, and then start sanity checking it, talking to everybody, making sure that it's going to actually work the way I believe it's going to work. Because I'm not going to, be completely correct in everything I do. I'm going to make mistakes. And that's where this is a team effort. So I talk to everybody, make sure we kick the tires and make sure that car is going to roll down the hill successfully. So just planning, lots of planning. And then you need to be prepared for backup plans, rollback plans, and things like that, because even the best planned out thing, there could be some unforeseen circumstance and you cannot plan contingencies for everything. I mean, we could have everything nailed down to a T, but we didn't talk about NV Energy not having an outage or a brownout at that point in time, because that's not a consideration that we're making. And, even if we did take that into consideration, are we going to buy temporary generators for this? Probably not, because the tiny chance that something could happen. But things do sometimes line up and crazier things happen.
Got it. And when you mentioned that, I just thought of, I've done marketing in the past. And I know a lot of times when you're doing marketing, it's more of kind of, you kind of see what works. Would you say IT is something very similar?
I would say that IT is one of those things where at times it can feel like whack-a-mole. So you could, like you said, see what works. It could be process elimination or whack-a-mole. I've referred to it multiple ways, but it's, hey, how does this sound? And sometimes it could be in the way that you're actually just selling it, right? So speaking of marketing, packaging something one way and selling it to a consumer versus repackaging it, selling it another way, you could have the same exact product and sell it a separate way. Like Zima has become Smirnoff Ice, right? I mean, Zima, you don't sell it sold anywhere, but it's effectively, or a lot of people joke about it being the same thing. But there's a lot of ways that you could package something. And in IT, a lot of it really comes down to, this sounds like this will work. And sometimes it's not till you get to trying to do it in practice that you know that it doesn't work. On paper, everything seems great. Even fielding the ideas with your colleagues and your management team, like, yeah, that's great. And you go to do it, like, that was a terrible idea. Okay, lessons learned. Let's not do this again. So you don't always hit the nail on the head every single time, but we try and do it much more often than not.
Got it. No, totally get that. So thank you for sharing that with us, Trevor. And within your bio, you did mention you enjoy tinkering with technology at home. Can you share a recent project you've worked on and what you learned from it?
Yeah, so 3D printing. I've got a couple of 3D printers here at the house. It's been a little while since I poked at them, but they're very finicky. There's a lot there to learn and unpack. I feel like you could spend as much time learning how to do stuff with a 3D printer, and when they're all mostly, the mechanical movements and all that stuff, and get everything aligned just perfectly, and everything looks great, and then suddenly things still aren't working right. The medium's not adhering to the bed. Your print's not quite right. So there's a lot of nuance and a lot of things there. It's one of those things where patience goes a long way, and it's a reminder to me about the technologies that we have in the IT field, right?
Hmm.
IT and technology do not stop. They're constantly evolving. There's new technology that's not released that is going to be released in a couple weeks, a couple months, a year from now. It's a constant release cycle. And because of this, there's new features, there's new things to be concerned about, new bugs, new vulnerabilities, all kinds of stuff to work on. And the same thing applies to 3D printing. So to me, it was kind of a reminder to me in playing with that and working with it that you never know everything, and you've got to stay hungry and want to keep learning. So that's been the kind of a takeaway for me with 3D printing. It's enjoyable, but it's also annoying.
Got it. No, I get it. A lot of things that we do can be that way sometimes. Yes. And then how do you balance your professional life in IT with personal hobbies and family activities? Especially, I know in your bio, you did mention that you do have young children at home.
Yes. So my kids are very interested in technology as well. So they're constantly curious about what's going on. And to balance that, we've gotten a bit lucky. The kids had come into a house full of movers and shakers, as we like to put it. Our house, the normal, is busy. So there's not normally a day where there's nothing planned. There's almost always something going on. Going to the library, going to a concert, going to a show, going to the park, going to the gym, multiple things. But when it comes to work, it's trying to figure out how I can get everything scheduled in there and squeezed in there really to work with them, to do my stuff that I need to do at the house. The dishes aren't going to do themselves. So it's really a bit of a challenge, but I have to apply some level of project management to the stuff that goes on here as well to squeeze everything in. We try and get the kids set up to be able to take care of themselves as best as possible with certain things, especially now they're getting a little bit older. They're 7 and 10. So we're starting to lean on them having, responsibilities and taking care of stuff. But a lot of it really is just making sure that work is not impacting so much of our time that we aren't there for them when they need us.
Got it.
And when it comes to that, work life balance is critical. And if you allow it to, I've found in the past that work can be very consuming of your time. And I think that having boundaries and making sure that you set those and continue to reset those over time, because things tend to creep, work or even hobbies. You just have to make sure that you continue to re-update those.
Got it. No, I totally get it. I have a 2-year-old and a now 5-year-old.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and running a business and a few other things. I totally get it. It can be a balance that you have to learn. But yeah, that's pretty awesome, Trevor. So thank you for sharing that with us. You are currently exploring new opportunities. Like what type of roles or projects are you looking for within the next adventure?
So I'm really open at this point. As I mentioned, work-life balance is an important thing for me, and I think that employers and employees alike need to find the right fit. So I'm looking to find the right fit there. I hold myself to be quite technical in different areas, and I definitely enjoy technical stuff. I also really enjoy working with people and having that person to person interaction. So as a project manager, I really enjoyed getting to meet with all these different teams. I had no direct reports, but I had all these folks that I need to ask them to do things for me on these projects or for the company, right? So I enjoy all that. I get to meet everyone, get to have all these different personalities that I interact with, go to lunch and stuff with them. I really enjoy that. I also enjoy mentoring and tutoring and training people into seeing that they can do more than they thought of in themselves. So I'm really just looking for a next opportunity that allows me to have that work life balance. and either an individual contributor or manager. I'm open for whatever the next direction, comes for me, looks like. I'm very flexible in that regard. I've been blessed with the skill set that I have and a lot of the opportunities that have come my way. So I'm really just anxious to find a good fit.
Got it. And so when it comes to a good fit, are you more looking to be like a contractor, employee, or are you kind of open?
I'm open. It really depends. I mean, of course, it would be great to be full time so I could have benefits and stuff like that. But right now, pretty open.
Got it. Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. And what trends or emerging technology in IT do you think professionals should keep an eye on and why?
I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the video card market.
Mhm.
And not just for discrete graphics cards, but also the ones that are built onto motherboards, because we've seen a huge battle back and forth for a long time between NVIDIA and AMD. And most recently, Intel has been doing their own discrete graphics cards. They've had their own inbuilt graphics into their processors for quite some time. But I think that there's going to be a bit of a shakeup in the graphics market there as Intel. I mean, and they've got a ton of money to do it too, to really start to be more competitive in that space. We've seen AMD do a lot with AI. Their stock has gone bonkers. I mean, I made a mistake personally where I sold off some stock thinking, oh, it's not going to go above $15 a share. Of course, right after that, it ramped up quite a few times, and I felt a bit silly for having vacated my positions. But I truly think that there's going to be a bit of a shakeup there where people are going to be vying for more dominance in the AI field through the graphics processors and stuff they're making. And I think Intel is taking their first entry steps into that with some of the graphic stuff they're doing. It's cheaper and it is competing with some of the lower tier cards from both AMD and NVIDIA. So I think that there's going to be a bit of a shakeup there in the future.
Got it. And for some of our audience that may not understand exactly what you mean by that, could you just explain a little bit more?
Yeah. So competition is good. And when there's not a lot of competition, I think that the different companies, they can rest on their laurels. Hey, I don't have to, pardon me, do much more to improve this or make the next generation that much better. But if Intel enters the ring and there's now a three-way race instead of just AMD and NVIDIA, I think it'll get more interesting. We'll have potentially prices stagnate or hopefully lower as opposed to just continuing to increase. Like some of the high end graphics cards now can cost upwards of $2,000. They're absurdly expensive. So I think that it could be good for consumers. And I think in the business market, we're going to start to see changes in the offerings from Dell, Lenovo, and some of the other OEs in terms of what they're packaging in the devices you're able to purchase. We know that, for enterprise grade computers, there's a lot of asks from a lot of different parts of the business, whether it be graphics power, RAM, processing power. There's a fit for all different types of folks, and it comes down to price point and the portability and package and that you're receiving it in. And I think that that's going to change too. I think there's going to be more competition.
Got it. No, that's awesome. And then for those who are just starting in IT, what advice would you give to help them navigate their career paths and achieve growth?
Let me think about that one for a second. I think it would be a good idea if you can, if your network allows for it, with people you already know, talk to someone who's been in IT for a while. If you don't know anyone, join a group and talk to someone there that you don't know. Reach out blindly on LinkedIn. LinkedIn's a great place for this. Strike up a conversation. You never know when someone's randomly going to respond to something you send. What I would suggest is say more than just, hey, I'd like to connect. Uh, there's a lot of cool people on LinkedIn, and it's a good social media platform. I think that there's a lot you could do there. For example, my wife is part of Culture First, is a group that she works with out here. She does different training from the HR side, and going out to some of those events and meeting different people. There's stuff like that for IT. There's stuff like that for maker spaces, stuff like that for car stuff. And car stuff is very, very quickly becoming more of an IT related thing too, where everything is on the CAN bus. Everything needs to be done through the car's computer. So getting to know these people who have been in the industry for a while and learning from their experiences and hopefully maybe even avoiding some of their mistakes. There's a lot of mistakes you can make, like the one I mentioned earlier about negotiating at that point in time. But there's others too, like training paths. You could talk to one person, they say certifications are terrible. They don't prove that you know anything. Whereas someone else might say, get all the certifications you can. It's not going to hurt you. But it all depends upon the perspective. Get lots of perspectives.
Got it. No, that's excellent advice. And you did mention communities. Is there any communities that you can recommend, just thinking or offhand?
So one thing I think was really neat for me to do, and I need to get back into it, was the first community for the robotics competitions. I was doing that while I was working at Motional. My next door neighbor, Matt, the office down the hall from me, he was very, very good salesperson at getting people from the office to come and volunteer. So I got to be a robotics judge there for the competitions for some of the high schoolers out here in Vegas. And that was really rewarding experience. But beyond getting to do that hands-on part and talking with the kids about their robots and everything they did, it's all the other people from all over the place that I got to talk to and find out about their work experience, what they've done, their background. And not everyone was, an expert in their field. We had kids who were fresh out of college who were coming and helping out with some of these things too, and getting to just talk with them. So any number of different things exist, but I haven't looked for any computer related clubs in Vegas for a while. I know there, like, as I mentioned, maker spaces. There are some maker groups. I typically align in my personal time more with car groups. So, going to Cars and Coffee on Saturday. It's every Saturday in Henderson on Eastern. That's a fantastic place to go to just meet tons of people. So that's something I'd always recommend. If you like cars, you never know who's doing what with computers, even if it's not car related. So anywhere you go.
Got it. And that sounds pretty exciting. Just, being part of those communities, especially the one that you talked about with those kids with the robots. I'm sure that was a
Yes.
pretty amazing experience. And as someone who has transitioned into leadership, what are your top tips for effective team management and fostering a positive work environment?
So this one's going to sound a little funny, I think, but think of your working family as a family, right? And the reason I say that is you spend so much time at work, 8+ hours a day with these people, oftentimes spending more time with them over the course of the day than you do with your own family, at least Monday through Friday or Monday through Thursday if you're a local government employee in some respects. So you spend a lot of time with them, but there's different things where they're not family too. These are your coworkers. We're not going to treat them and talk to them the same way. So I think respect goes a long way. And if you treat people with respect and, you know, stay humble, I think that things go a lot easier for you in the working environment. Things, as I mentioned earlier, can be taken out of context. And I think it's a good idea to just be open and have communications. You don't know someone's motivations. You don't know these people other than what they've allowed you to know or what you've helped promote them to be comfortable talking to you about. If you're that standoffish person who's giving one answer responses, like, how was your weekend? Good. Don't expect a whole lot to come from those relationships. And I really think that cultivating good relationships is a huge part of who we are as a species. And in the workplace, it's incredibly important to connect. And I think that is a huge part, is just making sure that you can have those interpersonal relationships really build as much as you're willing to do. I think the more you're able to do that, the better. You don't need to share every last detail about your life, medical history, or anything like that. But you can definitely, have a good time getting to know some of the people you work with, and it could make working a whole lot more fun.
Sorry, a call was coming in.
No problem.
But no, I agree with you. I think building a relationship is the key with anything that you do. You mentioned LinkedIn. I mean, we got this relationship from a LinkedIn message that I sent over to you.
That's right.
So I just think that's, a starting process of a relationship. And who knows where this relationship goes to.
Of course.
So which is awesome. And any final thoughts or advice you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah. So I think when it comes to working on a project or a team, something that I've had some time coming to grips with too is not everyone is going to work the way you do. So you may think something is normal when it's not. Someone else may think something is normal when it's not. So a case in point being, You may think that you're normal and that everyone should operate the way that you do, how fast you do at these different things, but that's probably not normal. You're probably working fast. You're probably going faster than the curve. You're probably taking on more than someone else is either willing to or is able to. And that's not a bad thing. Everyone's different in their own ways. One of the things that has stuck out a lot to me in my career in the customer service side of IT, which is a large facet of it, is that you'll get those employees who are in front of you, 1 second, who will say things like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm so terrible at this. I'm bad at IT. I can't do these things." And these self-deprecating remarks. And I think it's critical to remember that we all have skills that we hold on to and that we found that work for us. And let's say that person who made that comment is a salesperson. I'm in IT. I don't do a whole lot of selling. I don't really sell much of anything other than maybe a project or an idea I might have to get it executed. But these people are selling day in and day out, and it becomes your responsibility in that in your job capacity to take care of them and help them out. And allowing yourself to remember that part of it can make your interaction that much better, because you're not pitying them or anything like that. You're helping them using your skill set. They're helping the business using theirs. Everyone's slice of the pie comes together to make the full business picture. And I think that that's something that is critical to remember. I may not have done the best way of describing that, but that's kind of how I look at it. Is we all have our unique thing that we bring. And as long as you can remember that, I'm doing, what I need to do, and it's part of the collective group, and they're doing that too.
No, everything you said, I agree with you. So that was awesome. And thank you so much, Trevor, for joining us today. Your information that you shared with us was very valuable. I'm excited for our podcast to come out live. Is there any way that people should connect with you?
LinkedIn would be great. So if you want to reach out on LinkedIn and just say, "Hey, I saw the podcast, I'd love to connect," or if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Do my best to answer. I can't answer all questions. Like if you ask, like, what companies did you acquire? I can't answer those questions. But, anything that's, more vague to like topics like we talked about today, or specifics about things going on in the industry with IT stuff, or my opinions on things, I'm happy to give opinions, but just be aware I may not be able to answer everything, but I'm happy to talk.
Got it. Awesome. And I'll be sure to put that in the bio. But Trevor, it was a pleasure, and we'll talk soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Shatoya.